Welcome to the Blue Line Project. I'm your host, John Gabrielson, and this podcast is brought to you by the Crime Reduction Institute Network. This show is not about slogans, it's not about outrage, politics, or sound bites. It's about problems. If you've been spending any time paying attention to conversations around policing today, one thing becomes obvious very quickly. We talk a lot about policing, but we solve very little. Most conversations stop at outrage, defense, or politics. Very few get past the question of who's to blame and into the harder questions, what's actually producing these outcomes? And that's the gap this podcast exists to fill. At the Crime Reduction Institute, our focus has always been simple: identify real problems, understand them honestly, and apply solutions that actually work in a real world. This podcast is simply an extension of that mission. This podcast is going to focus on current events revolving policing. And we're going to take a hard look at each one of those incidents. And we're going to look at the failures and the good and the bad. This podcast is not about the left or the right. It's not about politics, but it's about solutions. And as we start this podcast, I want to start with three simple things that I see wrong with law enforcement today. Three failures, three things that I think we can focus and fix. But first, we have to understand the problems that we face. Failure number one, everything becomes a moral argument. And I want you to let that sink in for a minute. Think about what's happening in Minnesota, even tonight, as we film this podcast. There's protesters in the street. There's ICE agents, local police officers, state police officers having a job to do. And there's a clash between these two entities. We've seen the unfortunate death of two individuals in law enforcement related incidents. And look at the moral outrage on both sides. You have one side that's morally outraged because they believe that the police are too aggressive or not real police officers, not doing their job correctly, or they don't know what they're doing. They shouldn't be in that city doing what they're doing because somehow it's not lawful. And so therefore, anything these officers do is wrong. And these poor innocent protesters have been murdered by these savage police officers. And the moral outrage and contempt, and we're going to arrest all of them, and we're going to hunt them down, and we're going to put them in jail, and you just wait till we come for you. That's moral outrage. But then you have moral outrage on the other side, calling these protesters terrorists. And all the things that they're doing is horrible. And sure, they are doing bad things, and there is lawlessness going on. But both of those incidents are very tragic. And both of those incidents that just happened that are shaping the arguments today were both absolutely avoidable. So moral outrage is truly, truly a problem that we face in American policing. But what drives this moral outrage? Well, it's the immediate environment in which we live. Think about this environment. You have TikTok, you have Twitter, you have Facebook, you have Instagram, and so many others where people can go and post their videos and post their comments and post their opinions. And that's great. Information sharing today in the 21st century is unlike anything at any point in human history. However, it has a downside because you can post videos without context, make commentary without understanding or knowledge, and you can rush to judgment. In a country where we're supposed to have guilty until proven innocent, oftentimes, or innocent until proven guilty, oftentimes we have the opposite: guilty until proven innocent rather than innocent until proven guilty. And that is a problem. And that's what we get by this quick soundbite culture in which we live. And this moral outrage is shaping American law enforcement. But the question is, how do you respond to that? What do police departments do? How do you respond to the outrage on both sides? How do you temper it? How do you bring the temperature down? Well, the first thing is you have to find common ground and bring people together. But I believe much of what we're seeing today is driven by a lack of education. Now, there is some issues in our society, and we definitely have people that are pretty radicalized and would be more to the communist, socialist, Bolshevik side of things. But setting that aside, I believe that the average person, the average American, truly needs a better education to understand what police officers do, how we do our job, the nuances of our job. What actually happens when use of force is necessary, the split decisions we have to make based on the circumstances given to us on the street. These are the things that we want to address here at the Blue Line Project. That moral outrage, though, is a problem, and it is something that we will address. Failure 2, not understanding metrics or being metric-driven in policing. You see, when I was a young officer and I first graduated the academy, it was expected that I went out and wrote a bunch of tickets. It was expected that I made a lot of traffic stops. It was expected that I went to jail all the time. And I was measured as an officer by those metrics. But here's my question. Can you truly measure law enforcement by how many arrests we make or how many traffic stops we make? We really can't. Another problem is not only the arrest metrics, but call response. You hear a lot of police chiefs say, well, we just need to get our call response time down. It takes too long for us to get calls. If we get to calls faster, somehow that's going to reduce crime or make a better quality of life. The evidence just doesn't support that. There's been research done going back many years on response times. And really, the extra 30 seconds is negligible in actual crime reduction. And then you have the whole issue of clearance rates. Well, we just got to clear more cases, get more detectives. Well, that's great. We do need to clear cases, and we have to have a measure for that. But is clearing cases just going to automatically reduce calls? Is that going to reduce violence? Is that going to reduce crime? The answer to that, again, based on research, is no. Now, are all three of these things important? Call clearance, arrest rates, and response times? They all absolutely are critically important. But at the Blue Line Project, we want to go beyond that. We want to go to community building, bringing people together. And we want to use metrics to support that. We want to use metrics to get ahead of the curve. We want to use metrics to see patterns. We want to use metrics to figure out which environments we need to address. And then we want to bring other tools to those environments, like crime prevention through environmental design or CPTED, or working with code enforcement, Health and Human Services, or the health department, or other government agencies that can help us bring a different set of eyes to these set of circumstances. Because what I've learned in my last 20 plus years in law enforcement, it's much easier to change a place than it is to change people's hearts and people's minds. We have to do both. But that's why I'm such a proponent of place network or place-based investigations. And then failure number 3, policy written far from the street. Yes, too often people promote, they leave the street, they move up in the ranks, and then they're in the positions to write policy. And oftentimes well-intentioned, policies are poorly written. Policies don't take in consideration the realities that the street level officer faces. They don't take into consideration some of the decision-making processes and the amount of time decisions have to be made in. And so therefore we get bad policy. We also get policy that's in reaction to something bad that happened, or a policy because an officer messes up. So we get a new policy. And the one that comes to mind was a policy we had at APD back in 2007. See, they had a policy because some officers had gotten hurt, or suspects, I should say, got hurt, and officers had tased them. The suspects were running, and they tased fleeing suspects, and they had gotten hurt. And this wasn't acceptable and caused some public outrage. So what was the administration's at the time response? Well, we're going to write a new policy that you can no longer tase a fleeing suspect. So that was the policy. Well, now comes me. I'm a young officer, been on the street about 3 years, and I see a vehicle that has headlights are out, driving on the wrong side of the road, and run the license plate and comes back with felony warrants attached to the plate. And so I go to make the traffic stop and turn my emergency lights on, and the vehicle runs, and a pursuit ensues. And I chase him all around Austin for about 20 minutes, and he finally crashes out in a neighborhood. He gets out of the car and runs, and I chase him down. Well, upon catching him and tackling him, we go to the ground. Boom! My knee blows out, my right knee. And I was in excruciating pain The officer that was my backup who had the canine said as he was getting out of the car, he could hear my knee blow and he thought I had been shot. That's how loud it was. Well, EMS got there after we had the suspect in custody and I was in the ambulance and they put me on morphine. And now let me tell you, that morphine, that's good stuff. Anyways, I felt really good. The pain was subsiding. I was in the back of the ambulance getting ready to transport it. And guess who shows up? Chief Acevedo. And he's like, hey, man, he comes in the back of the ambulance and says, hey, great job tonight. I listened to it on the radio. Man, you were calm. Great way to call the pursuit. Man, it was awesome, outstanding, excellent. We got the bad guy, rah, 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 right? And then he says to me, he looks me straight in the face and he goes, I have one question for you. Whatever, Chief, what do you got? Hit me. Well, you see, when you ran and you chased him, why didn't you tase him? And I said, are you kidding me? And he's like, yeah, why didn't you tase him? Because you wrote a policy that said I can't. You legit made a sign and everything for it. And I was like, some expletives. My sergeant's going, oh my God, John, you're going to get me in trouble. But you know what was interesting? Chief looked back at me and he goes, you know, I've had 2 or 3 other officers hurt in a very similar fashion that are going to probably need surgery just like you. And maybe we ought to relook at that policy and change it back. And he did. And I have to tell you that I was really impressed that he actually listened to me and made a policy change on it. But unfortunately, too many policies are made from the street. They're made, like I said earlier, just in a reactionary fashion because of maybe city management putting pressure or activist groups or whatever. So those are 3 major problems that we have facing American policing. So the question becomes, how do we then deal with these issues? Well, evidence-based policing. It's a term that you hear all the time. Chiefs use it as a catchphrase oftentimes, saying, yeah, we're evidence-based. But do we truly understand what evidence-based policing is and where it comes from? But inside of evidence-based policing is, to me, another thing that's very important, problem-oriented policing. And problem-oriented policing is exactly how it sounds, addressing problems. So when you start putting these two together, you're starting to get a comprehensive overview or a framework to do better. So problem-oriented policing has to be evidence-based. And that leads me to Jerry Ratcliffe, Dr. Jerry Ratcliffe. And he's the author of Reducing Crime and does a video series called American Policing. And he actually has an acronym that he came up with called HYPE. It's a very important acronym. It's one that I've taken seriously and now is in every single thing that I do. Every initiative that I write, I use this acronym as my methodology. And H, as Jerry says, stands for harm focused. What does that mean? It means doing no harm. That means looking at a situation, understanding what harms are coming to the community because of what's happening, what harms can come to the community by what I do to solve those problems, and how am I going to hurt the community or help the community? So in everything that I do, I'm harm focused. And if you take that approach in American policing to everything that you do, it changes your entire vision. In its nature, has empathy because it's completely focused on doing no harm. It's the same oath that doctors and nurses take, or anybody in the medical field, right? To do no harm. And they use evidence then to figure out what works and doesn't. When you go to the doctor's office and you have a problem or there's some ailment, they'll give you a drug or a treatment and they'll see if it works. If it doesn't work, what do? They do something different. Well, it's no different in problem-oriented policing that's evidence-based. And that starts with being focused on doing no harm. But then there's the I, intelligence-led. Intelligence or metrics is the basis to everything. And that's going to be the basis to this podcast, is looking at good numbers. And I hope to have crime analysts and academics well-versed in the area of crime analytics to talk more in-depthly about how we gather and get intelligence, and then how we use that intelligence within our initiatives in our problem-oriented policing type solutions. That's intelligence-led. Intelligence-led helps you get to the why things happening. What do police departments do most of the time? They chase the what's happening. If crime goes up, they do something to fix it. with crime goes down, we must have done something to bring crime down. Well, in reality, crime has a mean, and crime has a natural ebb and flow that stays on that mean. And if you're constantly chasing the ups, you have a problem because you're not chasing actual spikes, you're chasing the mean. Jerry Ratcliffe gives the example of a football player, right? You have a football player that's performing really well or whatever, maybe in their first season, and then they kind of plateau off. And then they have 2 or 3 seasons where they're not so good. Then all of a sudden, boom, they have a breakout season, right? And they're the next, winner of the Heisman if they're in college, or, the next Hall of Famer if they're in the NFL. And then all of a sudden, they're right back down to that mean again. And the next 2 seasons are like all the previous seasons. That's called the mean or the regress of the means. And we cannot chase that. But being intelligence-led helps us avoid those spikes, those momentary spikes, and not chase them. We're looking for real spikes, real patterns to identify the problem using really good intelligence that we get through our community engagement. It's funny, I have a saying in my office where I work. I tell all the guys, hey, we have one goal, community engagement with a purpose. What's that purpose? To reduce crime. Secondly, or actually thirdly, is P, problem-oriented, which is where I started, slowing things down. So you're being harm-focused, you're using intelligence to identify the problems, and then you focus on those problems and come up with solutions that are long-term and sustainable. So for example, if I have a theft ring, if I just go out and arrest the thieves, but I don't do anything about where the property is being fenced or the people buying the property, do I actually stop the crime? What if I don't break up the network within their working? That's also a problem. So we have to be able to slow things down, look at the problems, identify the problems by having good intelligence, and then come up with common sense solutions. And then lastly, I've mentioned it earlier, being evidence-based. Going to look at what works and what doesn't work. Critically important. We must be evidence-based in all that we do. So problem-oriented policing is foundational in American policing, and it's something that we have to do. At its core, it's identifying problems, analyzing root causes, testing solutions, and then measuring the results. And that is another area that we fail in law enforcement, actually measuring results. I've seen a lot of initiatives that we do, and we do a quick glance at the results, looking at how many arrests we made and all the great and wonderful things we did and how much dope and guns we seized. But do we actually look at the long-term effect? Do we actually come back and reevaluate that same area 3 months down the road, only to realize the crime that we allegedly suppressed has come right back? Maybe with different actors because we arrested the other ones, but nonetheless, it comes back. And so then you get blame placed on, well, why didn't this work? Well, when you're taking a hype approach and you're looking at things through addressing real problems and using real world evidence of what works and what doesn't, then you get accountability, and then you get sustainability, and then you actually get real crime reduction. So why does this podcast exist? There's plenty of voices out there talking about policing today, but very few are willing to criticize bad policy and defend good policing at the same time. In this podcast, I seek to examine this from a professional perspective. I'm going to look at evidence, experience, but one thing that we're going to do is have uncomfortable honesty. I'm going to call balls, I'm going to call strikes, and we're going to talk about things, and we're going to have a chat and talk about it, and I'm looking forward to hearing back from you all. This will not be a partisan show. It will not be performative. And I'm not going to reduce complex problems into catchy slogans. No, we're going to look at real solutions. We're going to walk things out, work things out, talk about things. So who is this podcast for? It's for the line officer out there working each and every day. I know you will get something out of it. It is for the police supervisors because we're going to talk about leadership and talk about the future. And I think it'll be very important for you. It's for police chiefs because we're going to talk about policy decisions, look at federal consent decrees and are they good, are they bad? and other topics like that. It's for the community, because at the end of the day, the Blue Line Project is designed to build trust, bringing communities together, looking at common values and virtues. This program seeks to bring people together through education and understanding. That's the drive and impact of the show. In coming episodes, we're going to talk about leaderships under crisis, use of force policy, recruitment and retention, and what truly builds public trust. I believe American policing as it is today is absolutely constitutional, is absolutely, for the most part, correct. But one of the things that I want to point out as we close, systems are made up of people, and the American judicial system is made up of people. So if the system is broken, it's not the system, it's the people in the system. So to fix the system, we as the people in the system have to do better, have to be better educated, and have to bring real solutions to real problems. This is the Blue Line Project.